Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here. A quick preview and prediction for Tony Harrison versus Jermell Charlo 2. This fight goes down on the 21st of December, takes place at the Toyota Arena in Ontario, and yeah, I think it's a good fight, an intriguing fight, and I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, Tony Harrison won the first fight. I would say that was a minor upset. Jermell Charlo was expected to win, but he was outpointed by Tony Harrison last December. In fact, when this rematch takes place, it's almost a year to the day since the first fight. The original fight took place on the 22nd of December, and the rematch takes place on the 21st. So almost a year to the day. But the question is, can Jermell Charlo make the adjustments and avenge his defeat, or will Tony Harrison repeat what he did the first time around? I think it's a very intriguing boxing match, I've got to say. Now let's get into the tail of the tape and we will go from there. Of course, we will start with the champion Tony Harrison. He has a record of 28 wins, 2 defeats, 0 draws. 21 of his 28 wins coming by way of knockout, whereas Jermell Charlo has a record of 32 wins, 1 defeat, 0 draws. 16 of his 32 wins coming by way of knockout. Both fighters are orthodox fighters. Tony Harrison is listed as 6'1" with a 76.5-inch reach, whereas Jermell Charlo is listed as 5'11" with a 73-inch reach. So Tony Harrison is the taller, longer man and the rangier fighter. That certainly was a factor in the first fight, but will it be a factor in the rematch? Potentially, potentially. And one more thing to note before we get into the style breakdown and who I think is going to win, it's worth mentioning Tony Harrison hasn't actually fought since that first fight. He's basically been out of the ring for a whole year, so will he be affected by ring rust? We will see. Tony Harrison is a guy who relies on his timing, he relies on his distance control, he likes to set his own rhythm and fight to his pace, and I've got to say, I think inactivity could affect that type of style, so the inactivity of Tony Harrison is certainly something that's worth thinking about going into this rematch. I know Jermell Charlo hasn't exactly been active himself, but I think his style permits for that a little bit more, and he still fought more than Tony Harrison in the meantime, even though it is against a limited opponent in Jorge Cota. But anyway, let's talk about this fight, the adjustments both guys need to make. First and foremost, Jermell Charlo. I think in regards to the first fight, I felt it was very close, but I felt it was one of those fights he threw away. I think if he upped the ante a little bit, upped his punch output, and was a little more aggressive, I think he could have potentially won the first fight. I think Jermell Charlo's problem in that first fight was the fact that he stood off Tony Harrison way too long, and in my opinion, the reason he did that was because he was falling in love with his punching power. Before that Tony Harrison fight, Jermell Charlo scored a few good knockouts. I mean, he starched Erickson Lubin, he starched Charles Hatley, he starched John Jackson. So he was coming off some good knockouts, and I think that played with his mind. In his mind, he thought he was a puncher, and as a result, he was looking for one big shot against Tony Harrison, and he just got out-jabbed in a lot of rounds, which lost him the fight. He was fighting like a guy with puncher's arrogance. If he was a bit more active in certain rounds, I think he could have won that fight, because there was a lot of close rounds in that fight where he lost based on his inactivity. So for Jermell Charlo, the first thing I believe he needs to adjust is his output. Be more active with your hands. If you're looking to knock out Tony Harrison, you can't really do it by swinging a wild shot. I think Tony Harrison's too good for that. I mean, Tony Harrison's never been caught clean with one shot and got knocked out. Both times he was stopped by accumulation and pure work rate. Now, Jermell Charlo doesn't bring that, but he can certainly be more dangerous with his knockout power. Like I say, try and set that knockout up. Use the jab, feint, try and bait Tony Harrison in. Last fight, I felt Jermell Charlo was a little bit basic, and as a result, he got picked off by Tony Harrison's jab. So in this fight, Jermell Charlo needs to be more active. He needs to lose that puncher's arrogance, and he needs to take the initiative a bit more. And he needs to go back to his fundamentals On the come up, Jermell Charlo actually looked like the better boxer of the twins. You would see him stick and move, you would see him do different things, but these days, like I've said, he's reverted to a bit of a puncher. You know, we need to see Jermell Charlo bring back a more varied offence with greater output. If he can do that, I think he stands a really good chance of winning this fight, because based on Tony Harrison's first performance, while he boxed well, I certainly believe he was there for the taking. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but my whole thing with the first fight was that Jermell Charlo really threw it away, rather than Tony Harrison went out there and won it, if that makes sense. So if Jermell Charlo makes the adjustments, I think he's got a great chance to win this fight. That's not to say Tony Harrison can't make his own adjustments. Now, I mentioned that I felt Jermell Charlo had what I call a puncher's arrogance. Well, let's flip the script for Tony Harrison. Tony Harrison actually punches really hard. He's got punching power in that right hand. However, in the first fight, he was really passive. He was content to box behind that jab and not take many risks with the right hand. He wasn't keen on overextending and leaving himself open. While he boxed a good fight, I think in this rematch, he may need to show a little bit more, and he may need to take more risks in throwing that power shot. So this time around, I would like to see Tony Harrison actually mix it up a little bit more and try to utilise that right hand more, because like I say, it's an effective punch. He throws it well, he throws it quick, he throws it with power, so it's a good punch. I just believe he needs to throw more of those shots in this second fight. I think there was a moment in the first fight, I think it was towards the end, I want to say, when he caught Jermell Charlo with a right hand, and it certainly had an effect. So I believe Tony Harrison has the power to hurt Jermell Charlo, or at least get his respect. And I think that could be important in this fight, when Jermell Charlo is going to be coming at him more hungry and, you know, determined to avenge his first loss. So as good as Tony Harrison boxed first time around, I don't think that will be enough in this rematch. I believe he himself needs to make improvements, you know, whereas Jermell Charlo needs to be a bit more active with his hands and box a bit more, use that jab a bit more. I think Tony Harrison actually needs to be a bit more aggressive, if I'm being honest. And I'm not saying he needs to turn into Gennady Golovkin. All I'm saying is he needs to be a bit more active with the right hand, and he needs to try and get Jermell Charlo's respect. Especially if Jermell Charlo starts fast, more aggressive. If he could time Jermell Charlo a few times early on, then I think that would be really good for his chances, to be honest. However, if he's more passive, then I think it could be a much tougher fight. Don't get it twisted, I think Tony Harrison's boxing will always give Jermell Charlo problems, because Tony Harrison does have better feet, he does have a far more effective jab, but is that enough to win this fight if Jermell Charlo improves? I'm not sure. I certainly believe Tony Harrison also needs to make improvements. I mean, first fight I saw some people say he schooled Jermell Charlo. I never saw that fight. I just felt he outpointed Jermell Charlo based on that jab, and that jab is very good, don't get it twisted. So both guys have a legitimate chance to win this rematch. I can see it going either way. I wouldn't be shocked if Tony Harrison did it again, because on his day, he is actually a really, really talented fighter. Like I said, lovely jab, good feet, underrated power. He's a good boxer, but he's one of those fighters that never really puts it all together. He always kind of fights within himself. That's the impression I get with Tony Harrison. And, you know, while he's good, while he's a good boxer, if Jermell Charlo is improved in this rematch, can Tony Harrison then make improvements on his own side to cope with that? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the mind games of Tony Harrison. Now, we don't usually mention these in pre-fight predictions and whatnot, but I think it's relevant in this fight. Jermell Charlo strikes me as a guy who is very emotional and easily triggered. And in the build-up to the second fight, even when it was first scheduled back in May, I believe, Tony Harrison was really upping the ante with the trash talk. And it looked like Jermell Charlo was biting. And even this time around, when this fight got rescheduled for December, again Tony Harrison trash talking and Jermell Charlo biting. Jermell Charlo needs to keep his emotions in check, and he can't bring that into the ring, because if he does, he'll make mistakes, and then he could get countered by Tony Harrison. He could load up too much, walk into that jab, walk into that right hand, and that could be bad for him. So Jermell Charlo needs to keep a cool head going into this rematch. That's not something I've seen much of from Jermell Charlo, I've got to be honest, but it's certainly something he needs to improve on or suppress going into this rematch. But you guys want a pick, you guys want an official prediction. My pick is Jermell Charlo wins this fight, to be honest. Whether it's by knockout or points, I'm not really sure. I would lean towards points, it could be close, but I'm going with Jermell Charlo to avenge his first defeat of his career. What about you guys? Share your thoughts below, tell me how you feel about this fight. Peace.